I've collected 170 unusual historical photos that you might have missed. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most? In 1962, former Hollywood star Barbara Payton arrived at a police station covered in bruises, but refused to identify her attackers. Once one of Hollywood's highest-paid actresses, she died less than 5 years later after years of alcohol and drug addiction. The Iroquois Theater fire erupted during a packed performance in Chicago on December 30th, 1903, killing more than 600 people. Locked exits, unfinished fire equipment, and doors that opened inward turned the supposedly fireproof theater into a deadly trap. Private First Class Douglas Lightheart holds an M1919 machine gun, while Gerald Thursby Sr. smokes beside him during the Battle of Peleliu in September 1944. Around them, the island has been reduced to shattered trees, scorched earth, and hidden Japanese defenses. Peter Hujar took this photograph of Warhol superstar Candy Darling in 1973 as she was dying from lymphoma at just 29. Candy approved its publication, and her life had already inspired the Velvet Underground song Candy Says and a famous verse in Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side. This is the last known photograph of Japanese director Sadao Yamanaka, seated on the right, before he died in Manchuria at just 28. Only 3 of his films survive, including Humanity and Paper Balloons, now considered a masterpiece of Japanese cinema. Abraham Jones, a formerly enslaved man, works outside his Alabama home in 1937, more than 70 years after slavery ended. His photograph preserves the face of someone who survived slavery and lived to see the modern era. The Royal Navy minesweeper Hubberston was torn apart at the Bruges scrapyard in 1993. Built to hunt deadly naval mines, the ship ended its life under an excavator, with its bow ripped open and its internal decks exposed. During the First World War, an Indian cavalryman found 2 Christian girls starving in the Mesopotamian desert. Though his own unit was on short rations, he leaned from his horse and gave them half of his food. A bomb explodes beside the Japanese light cruiser Kiso during an air raid on Kiska Bay in the Aleutian Islands. The near miss spared the ship, but the blast threw a towering wall of water and shrapnel dangerously close to its hull. In 1996, the Soviet space tracking ships Akademik Sergei Korolev and cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin waited to be dismantled on the beaches of Alang, India. Their giant antennas once relayed signals between Earth and spacecraft when ordinary ground stations could not reach them. Few fighters escaped Rocky Marciano without serious damage. Rex Lane lost teeth, Roland La Starza needed arm surgery, and Carmine Vingo fell into a coma. Ezzard Charles later developed ALS, leaving the former heavyweight champion unable to walk before his death in 1975. This rare photograph shows John Gilmore, known on stage as Sandow, and his wife Betty Whitfield during their Australian tour in 1947. The smiling couple performed together at a time when interracial marriages still faced fierce public prejudice. In 1999, a tortured woman found dead in Wisconsin was finally identified 20 years later as 23-year-old Peggy Johnson. Former nurse Linda LaRoche received life in prison after investigators learned she had enslaved, beaten, and killed Peggy inside her home. On August 25, 2001, this overloaded plane crashed seconds after taking off in the Bahamas, killing Aaliyah and 8 others. Investigators found it was about 700 pounds overweight, while the pilot was not approved to fly it and had cocaine and alcohol in his system. Born without arms or legs, Aloysia Wagner became a famous sideshow performer known as Violetta. Smart, stylish, and fearless, she reportedly head-butted men who tried to kiss her without permission. In 1991, Dolly Parton visited service members at Fort Hood, Texas, posing beside an aircraft painted with a shark face. The troops lifted her into the air as she smiled in white heels and a matching dress. This is Lenin, the world's first nuclear-powered surface ship, cutting through Arctic ice in 1964. It traveled over 654,000 nautical miles and cleared a path for more than 3,700 ships. On October 17, 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake crushed a section of the Cypress Street Viaduct, trapping cars between its two concrete decks. The collapse stretched from 16th Street to the MacArthur Maze and killed 42 people. In 1948, Chicago mother Lucille Chalafou hid her face beside a sign offering her 4 children for sale as the family faced eviction. Within 2 years, the 4 children and their newborn sibling were separated, and several later described severe abuse in their new homes. In 1930s London, this boy used roller skates and held on to his running dog to race through the streets. It was fast, dangerous, and long before helmets or modern safety gear became common. In 1902, American forces captured Filipino General Vicente Lucban and chained him beside his officers. Lucban had led fierce resistance on Samar, where his fighters helped inflict one of the worst American defeats of the Philippine-American War. On April 9, 2003, an Iraqi boy struck the severed head of Saddam Hussein's statue with his sandals. In Iraqi culture, hitting someone with a shoe is a powerful sign of humiliation and contempt. This rare photograph is said to show 27-year-old Vladimir Putin with his Soviet intelligence superior in 1979. The famous Dresden claim is impossible because Putin was not posted to East Germany until 1985. Adolf Hitler descends the steps in a rain cape during the Nuremberg Rally of 1936. Behind the spectacle, the regime used these carefully staged congresses to turn mass obedience into political theater. On August 20, 1944, fighters of the Kalinsky Battalion watched the Pasta building burn during the Warsaw Uprising. Its capture from German forces secured a major communications center and became one of the uprising's greatest victories. This aerial photograph shows Lower Manhattan in 1931, when its crowded piers were still packed with ships. The tall tower near the center is 40 Wall Street, which briefly became the world's tallest building before the Chrysler Building took the title. In 1962, Catherine Camberley Kate Ward pushed her famous cart through Surrey, surrounded by strayed dogs she had rescued. From 1943 until her death in 1979, she never refused a dog and saved more than 600 animals. French soldiers marched through an underground fortress on the Maginot Line during the Phoney War of 1939 and 1940. The vast defenses had hospitals, railways, and kitchens, yet Germany defeated France by attacking through the Ardennes instead. An Army mess cook prepares meat at the Fort Myer Officer Training Camp in Arlington, Virginia in 1917. While future officers trained for the First World War, black servicemen worked under the strict segregation that shaped nearly every part of Army life. On May 19, 1936, the Golden Gate Bridge stood unfinished, with its towers rising above the strait, but no roadway between them. Workers later built the suspended roadway over powerful currents and strong winds, and the bridge opened just 1 year later. This colorized photograph shows the first freshmen of St. Andrew's Academy in Candaba, Philippines, in 1945. After World War II left clothing in desperately short supply, several boys attended school wearing surplus United States military uniforms. Yitzhak Rabin carried this blood-stained copy of Song for Peace in his pocket when a Jewish extremist assassinated him on November 4, 1995. Minutes earlier, Rabin had sung the song at a Tel Aviv peace rally opposing the violence surrounding the Oslo Accords. President Jimmy Carter embraces country music star Dolly Parton at a White House luncheon on October 2, 1979. First Lady Rosalind Carter watches as Parton playfully leans back in the presidential receiving line. Dolly Parton poses in her dazzling angel wings suit during a 1978 tour. The glittering jumpsuit turned her raised arms into enormous wings, making every entrance unforgettable. These Oglala Lakota men worked in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show in 1905, performing staged battles for huge crowds. They earned wages and traveled abroad while the United States government was suppressing their ceremonies, language, and traditional way of life. In 1956, Jane Mansfield visited Marineland of the Pacific in California to promote her new film, The Girl Cannot Help It. Wearing a swimsuit and heels, she fed a leaping dolphin as cameras captured the perfect publicity shot. This is James Hong in his 1947 high school yearbook, 7 years before his first acting role. At 97, the voice of Mr. Ping and villain Lo Pan is still acting after more than 600 screen credits. Dorothea Lange photographed this country store in Gordonton, North Carolina, on a Sunday afternoon in 1939. Her camera captured 4 men on the same porch, while the segregated South denied them the same rights. On August 25, 1926, 2 women modeled daring bathing suits on the beach at Deauville. Their fitted designs, short skirts, decorated caps, and high heels captured the bold new freedom of women's fashion during the 1920s. 5 dancers pose inside a studio in the 1950s, captured on vivid Kodachrome film. Their fitted costumes and carefully arranged positions reveal a formal photo session rather than an ordinary rehearsal. In 1913, French photographer Stéphane Passet photographed this Mongolian woman imprisoned in a wooden box, reportedly condemned to die from starvation. He was documenting local life for Albert Kahn's Global Color Archive, and his team followed a strict rule against interfering. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial stood almost directly beneath the atomic bomb when it exploded 600 meters above the city on August 6, 1945. Its reinforced walls survived while nearly everything around it was destroyed, leaving the famous atomic bomb dome. In January 1951, Korean civilians crossed the frozen Han River on a narrow temporary bridge as Chinese and North Korean forces advanced toward Seoul. Carrying children and everything they could save, the refugees left the capital visible behind them and fled south. Frenchman Louis Coulon became famous for a beard that reportedly grew more than 3 meters long. In this striking photograph from 1904, a small cat is sitting inside the massive beard that made Coulon a star of popular postcards. After the Twin Towers collapsed, rescue dogs searched unstable rubble for survivors in exhausting 12-hour shifts. When live finds became rare, handlers staged practice rescues to keep the dogs motivated and ready to search. At first, this looks like a random pile of clothes, shoes, and personal items, but investigators seized them from Lee Harvey Oswald after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. In the center lies the search warrant used to uncover and document the evidence. At 8 feet 11 inches, Robert Wadlow was the tallest person ever reliably measured. This rare 1940 photo shows him towering over a crowd shortly before his death at just 22. In 1952, former soldier Christine Jorgensen became America's first widely known transgender celebrity after undergoing a series of operations in Denmark. Newspapers turned her private transition into a national sensation, with headlines like "XGI becomes Blonde Beauty." Dorothea Lange photographed this farm worker carrying a baby beside his family's shack in California's Imperial Valley in 1937. Their home, built from scrap wood and cardboard, exposed the harsh living conditions faced by migrant laborers during the Great Depression. During the Wall Street crash of 1929, mounted police struggled to control huge crowds outside the New York Stock Exchange. Billions of dollars vanished as panic selling destroyed fortunes and helped push America toward the Great Depression. In 1954, American inventor Don Pointer created a whiskey-flavored toothpaste containing 3% alcohol. The bizarre product became a hit among drinkers who could now start their morning with the taste of whiskey. 17-year-old Ronaldo holds up his passport after signing for PSV Eindhoven in 1994. In his first season in Europe, the Brazilian scored 30 goals in just 33 league matches. In the early 1900s, circus strongwoman Katie Sanduina stunned crowds by lifting her husband, Max Heyman, with one arm. the star of Barnum and Bailey reportedly defeated every man who challenged her in strength contests. In 1988, Israel Kamakawiwo Ole called a studio at 3 in the morning and arrived 15 minutes later, weighing nearly 500 pounds. He then recorded Somewhere Over the Rainbow in a single take, creating the version that later became famous worldwide. This early photograph shows a Native American hunter beside a wolf-like dog and a traditional shelter. Many indigenous peoples respected wolves as skilled hunters and powerful spiritual figures, unlike settlers who often feared and killed them. Around 1930, this young man protested teacher pay after leaving school for a job earning $21 a week. His former teacher made just $17.78, meaning the student earned $3.22 more each week. Bill Clinton works among packed boxes on January 19, 2001, his final full day as president. The next morning, he handed the White House to George W. Bush after 8 years in office. Robert Kennedy plays catch with one of his older sons beside the family pool in 1964. Behind this relaxed moment stood one of America's most powerful political families, raising 11 children while Kennedy served as United States Attorney General. On August 25, 1926, Brazilian Dr. Octavio Felix Pedroso demonstrated his mysterious vitometer, claiming it could detect any disease by examining the blood. He even said the device could cure illness by changing the blood through the lungs, but no credible evidence ever proved it worked. On February 7, 1940, evacuee Barry Peacock calmly ate ice cream while sitting on a huge naval mine washed ashore at Deal in Kent. The boy's casual pose turned a deadly weapon of war into one of Britain's most surreal wartime photographs. Antonio Inoki kicks the back of Muhammad Ali's leg during their bizarre 1976 fight. Inoki stayed on the canvas and landed more than 100 kicks, leaving Ali's legs badly swollen and bleeding. In 1941, a textile worker and his family lived in this company-owned house beside the Mary Layla Mill in Greensboro, Georgia. The mill provided housing, but the family's sparse bedroom reveals how little comfort came with the job. In 1958, an artist installed a giant millipede model at the American Museum of Natural History. It represented Arthropleura, a prehistoric creature that grew longer than a person and lived more than 300 million years ago. Around 1910, circus strongwoman Katie Sanduina, known as Lady Hercules, posed while supporting 3 grown men at once. She reportedly earned her stage name after defeating famous strongman Eugen Sandow in a weightlifting contest. In 1905, Sherlock Holmes creator Arthur Conan Doyle was photographed riding an early motorcycle outside his home. The exposed engine and bicycle-style frame reveal how dangerous and experimental motor travel still was. On June 10, 1944, the Carter Handicap produced the first triple dead heat in American stakes racing history. Brownie, Bosway, and Wait a Bit crossed the finish line together, and even the photo finish could not separate them. Chinese border guards watch a huge controlled explosion in the early 20th century when dynamite was used to cut roads and railways through remote frontier land. The blast throws a towering cloud of rock and dust into the air while the men stand dangerously close. These Soviet villagers were photographed watching a film for the first time in 1924. Their stunned faces were lit by the screen, capturing the moment cinema entered lives with no electricity or modern entertainment. In 1913, Prince Vladimir Orlov drove this Mercedes K-Gress through the spring mud near Tsarskoye Selo. Its tracks had canvas mud covers, while redesigned front skis helped the rare half-track crossground that trapped ordinary cars. In 1964, William Gedney photographed the Cornett sisters washing their hair in a metal tub beside the family car in rural Kentucky. Gedney lived with the family for weeks, capturing the poverty and daily life often hidden from the rest of America. Kane Tanaka was 11 when the First World War began, 36 when the Second World War began, and 74 when Star Wars was released. She survived cancer twice and lived to 119, becoming the second oldest verified person in history. Dora Rotchen competed in the women's high jump at the 1936 Olympics after being raised as a girl despite having male genitalia. In 1938, authorities declared Rotchen male, and he lived as Heinrich Rotchen until his death in 2008. Formerly enslaved Henry Robinson smiles outside his badly damaged home in 1937. His portrait was taken more than 70 years after slavery ended, showing how many freed families still lived in extreme poverty across the American South. Hours before a Milwaukee cat show in 1949, someone smeared makeup across Persian cat Petite Lily Bear. Her owner called it sabotage, claiming the attack ruined her chance to win. A truck driver pauses with a cigarette while hauling a heavy load through South Carolina around 1938. His battered cab, thick gloves, and exhausted stare reveal the brutal reality of road work before modern safety rules. Japanese soldiers scale the fortified wall of Nanking during their assault on the Chinese capital in December 1937. After the city fell, Japanese troops carried out mass killings and widespread atrocities against civilians and prisoners of war. In Rome around 1952, Alma Reville is served fettuccine alfredo by Alfredo Di Lelio, the chef who created the famous dish. Her husband, Alfred Hitchcock, watches as the pasta is dramatically mixed tableside with butter and Parmesan cheese. This fake Brazilian work card identified Nazi Dr. Joseph Mengele as Wolfgang Gerhard, a name he used while hiding from justice. The document was discovered in 1985, 6 years after Mengele drowned without ever facing trial. Between 1916 and 1918, French soldiers used this papier-mâché cow to hide an observer in no man's land. He watched German positions through concealed openings inside the fake animal. This 1955 photo shows the Sarajevo corner where Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie on June 28, 1914. Concrete footprints marked Princip's firing position, turning the spot that triggered the First World War into a chilling memorial. Italian Bersaglieri soldiers share cigarettes after arriving in North Africa in 1942 before heading toward the El Alamein front. There, Axis forces faced a decisive British offensive that shattered their defenses and forced a long retreat across Libya. Sheriff Lillian Holly and Prosecutor Robert Estill pose with John Dillinger inside the supposedly escape-proof Lake County Jail. In 1934, Dillinger escaped using a fake wooden gun, locked the guards in cells, and fled in Holly's car. Soviet soldiers visit Alexander Suvorov's tomb in Leningrad in 1944, months after the brutal siege was broken. His famously simple epitaph reads, "Here lies Suvorov, honoring the commander who never lost a battle." Castle Bravo exploded over Bikini Atoll on March 1, 1954, with a force of 15 megatons, more than twice the expected yield. The largest United States nuclear test spread radioactive fallout across nearby islands and exposed the crew of a Japanese fishing boat. NKVD snipers compare their combat results near Leningrad while wearing white camouflage suits designed for snow-covered terrain. These carefully trained marksmen hunted enemy officers, machine gunners, and observers, turning a single hidden rifle into a serious battlefield threat. In June 1944, Soviet BM-13 Katyusha launchers fired near Vyborg during a major offensive against Finland. Each launcher could unleash 16 rockets in seconds, striking the target before enemy forces had time to react. In Berlin in 1927, a street performer led a muzzled dancing bear while beating a drum. Such bears were trained through cruel methods and displayed for money until animal welfare laws ended the practice. This 1870 photograph shows a samurai with retainers wearing chainmail and carrying naginata, weapons designed for powerful cuts at a distance. Taken shortly after Japan abolished the samurai class, It captures warriors whose centuries-old way of life was disappearing. Single mother Irmelin Indenbirken poses with baby Leonardo DiCaprio in their Los Angeles home in 1975. Years before he became a global movie star, his earliest world was this modest room beneath a giant American flag. Raymond de la Roche became the world's first licensed female pilot in 1910, receiving license number 36. This photo was taken on June 7, 1919, just 5 weeks before she died while testing an experimental aircraft. Workers uncovered this Nakajima NK-11A engine beneath Tokyo's Haneda Airport on November 7, 1984. It was built for the Fugaku, a planned 6-engine Super Heavy bomber designed to cross the Pacific, strike the United States, and return to Japan. Carl Norwood, born with brittle bone disease, and Dick Hilburn, born with one arm and no other limbs, became lifelong best friends. Carl was a popular entertainer, while Dick became a skilled tattoo artist and used a skateboard to move around. A Red Army infantryman advances through a smokescreen on the Kursk front in July or August 1943. The smoke concealed Soviet troops from German machine guns as they crossed exposed ground toward enemy positions. In 1965, 6 Tongan boys were stranded on a deserted island for 15 months after their boat was wrecked. They survived with strict chores, a fire that never went out, and nightly songs and prayers until a fishing boat finally spotted them. On March 21, 1976, singer Claudine Longet shot Olympic skier Spider Sabic in their Aspen home, claiming the gun fired accidentally. Key evidence was excluded from court, and she served just 30 days in jail after being convicted of negligent homicide. In the 1950s, Admiral Hyman Rickover tested candidates in a chair with its front legs cut 6 inches shorter. As they struggled not to slide forward, he watched whether they could stay calm, think clearly, and answer under pressure. This Messerschmitt Bf-109 belonged to Erwin Grutz, whose White 6 was shot down by a British Boston bomber on July 4, 1942. The German fighter crashed into a house, killing Grutz and leaving its tail almost perfectly intact. In 1944, Japan formed special attack units whose kamikaze pilots deliberately crashed explosive-filled aircraft into Allied warships. Many were young men with limited training, sent on one-way missions as Japan faced severe aircraft and pilot shortages. After the earthquake struck San Francisco on April 18, 1906, broken gas lines sparked fires that burned for 3 days. The disaster killed more than 3,000 people and destroyed nearly 30,000 buildings, leaving over half the city homeless. In April 1945, Soviet troops trampled a Nazi flag while advancing through the outskirts of Vienna. A burning house behind them captured the brutal street fighting that ended Nazi control of the Austrian capital. In 2003, this abandoned water tank stood among ruined homes at Bombay Beach, once a popular Salton Sea resort. Today, strange art installations fill the former beach beside decaying trailers and abandoned vehicles. In the 1970s, Soviet bakery workers stacked fresh loaves by hand, with each one selling for just 25 kopecks. Bread prices were fixed by the state, making this everyday staple affordable even during widespread shortages. A B-2 was spotted refueling in midair directly above a neighborhood. The stealth bomber can fly more than 6,000 miles without refueling, but aerial tankers let it strike targets almost anywhere on Earth. This 1960s Ottawa hospital photo shows a patient smoking in bed as 6 nurses serve drinks and treats. Hospitals allowed indoor smoking at the time, making this cheerful bedside party seem completely normal. In January 1945, retreating German forces blew up Budapest's chain bridge, leaving only its stone pillars above the Danube. Behind it, Buda Castle stood burned and shattered after one of the fiercest urban battles of the Second World War. In the occupied Philippines, these Igorot girls were forced to bow to a Japanese sentry who was treated as a symbol of the emperor. Refusing this ritual could bring slaps, kicks, or worse, so some Filipinos avoided guarded streets, while others used exaggerated bows as quiet mockery. At Scutari Airport in January 1941, Italian infantry marched from transport planes toward the collapsing Greek-Albanian front. Behind them stood a Caproni CA-111 BIS, one of the aircraft rushing reinforcements into Albania. In 1920s, Paris Nativa and her husband, L. Richard, created daring fetish clothing and sold it under the name Eva Richard. Nativa modeled their designs herself, helping a private business become one of the era's most recognizable fetish wear brands. Southampton manager Bill Dodgen explains tactics with small markers on the dressing room floor in January 1949. Before video analysis and digital screens, managers used simple objects to show players exactly where to move. Fedor Jevtichu was born with hypertrichosis, but behind his striking appearance was a quiet, intelligent boy who loved reading. Later known as Jojo the Dog-Faced Boy, he became one of P.T. Barnum's biggest stars and performed for 23 years. Christine Jorgensen was a World War II veteran whose transition made her America's first transgender celebrity. She later rejected a film offer from Ed Wood and forced Vice President Spiro Agnew to apologize after he called another politician the Christine Jorgensen of the Republican Party. King Gojong of Korea stands beside his son, Crown Prince Sunjong, around 1900. Just 5 years later, Japan forced Gojong to surrender Korea's foreign affairs, and by 1910, Sunjong had lost the entire kingdom to Japanese annexation. East German students sought humanitarian aid for Cambodia in 1979. The donations came as Cambodia emerged from Khmer Rouge rule, which had killed nearly 2 million people. Frank Sinatra met Ava Gardner in 1943 when she was still married to actor Mickey Rooney. They married in 1951, just 72 hours after Sinatra's divorce from his first wife, Nancy Barbado, became final. Grid girls prepare for the 1986 Hungarian Grand Prix, the first Formula One race held behind the Iron Curtain. Around 200,000 fans attended and watched Nelson Piquet win after a famous sideways overtake on Ayrton Senna. A woman stands on a newly built railroad in 1930 when tracks were often laid by hand across dangerous and isolated land. Her long dress and elegant hat sharply contrast with the rough stones, exposed sleepers, and unfinished route beneath her feet. This photograph shows German airmen shot down during a bombing raid on Kiev on June 25, 1941. Injured, exhausted, and visibly stunned, they were captured just 3 days after Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. During Operation Barbarossa in the winter of 1941, Germany depended on 600,000 horses as temperatures near -30 degrees Celsius disabled trucks and froze engines. Long supply lines, Soviet scorched earth tactics, and inadequate winter clothing caused severe shortages, breakdowns, frostbite, and heavy losses by early 1942. In 1931, Moroccan writer Jean Boulet photographed Asso Bazou, a man with microcephaly who was falsely presented as the last living Neanderthal. He reportedly survived through hard labor in Morocco's Dades Valley and died in the 1950s at about 60 years old. On April 1, 1945, American forces invaded Okinawa in the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War. More than 60,000 troops landed on the first day with little resistance because Japanese forces were hidden in fortified positions inland. Dinner time inside a London workhouse in 1901, where the poorest survived under strict rules. In return for basic food and shelter, inmates faced hard labor, loss of freedom, and separation from their families. In 1926, Chiang Kai-shek prepared to leave Guangzhou and lead the northern expedition against China's powerful warlords. The campaign captured major cities and helped the nationalists establish a new central government in Nanjing. A wounded Viet Minh prisoner receives first aid from French and Vietnamese medics after a fierce firefight near Hong Yen in 1954. The image captures a rare moment when enemy soldiers tried to save the life of a man they had just fought. The cast of Apollo 13 posed with astronauts Jim Lovell and Fred Hayes beside Odyssey, the real command module that carried the crew home in 1970. The film became so realistic that some weightless scenes were shot aboard a diving aircraft. On November 16, 1957, police searching Ed Gein's farmhouse found missing shopkeeper Bernice Worden's body hanging in a shed. Inside the house were bowls made from skulls, furniture covered with human skin, preserved organs, and masks cut from corpses he had stolen from graves. A tenant farmer drinks coffee from a saucer during his midday meal in Muskogee, Oklahoma, in 1939. This once common method spread the hot liquid across a wider surface, cooling it quickly so workers could return to the fields. Australian soldiers posed beneath the Great Sphinx in Egypt in 1915 while training for the Gallipoli campaign. The photo is often falsely labeled as Indian troops celebrating victory at the Suez Canal. In 1934, a Soviet cavalryman trained in a chemical protection suit designed for battlefields contaminated by poison gas. Even the horse was covered with protective gear, showing how seriously the Red Army prepared for chemical warfare. Since 1800, boards beside the church in Wishford Magna have recorded the changing price of bread. The 1971 board revealed a shocking rise of nearly 50% compared with 1965. In 1920, 6-year-old Nancy Bentley was bitten by a snake and needed urgent care aboard an Australian warship. Because Navy rules banned treating civilians, the crew officially enlisted her as the ship's mascot so the doctor could save her life. In 1925, these New York students studied in an unheated classroom, wrapped in heavy blankets to survive the cold. Open windows and freezing air were believed to reduce the spread of tuberculosis and other diseases. In 1923, the Hollywood Association launched a campaign to drive Japanese residents out of the neighborhood. This photograph records its racist tactics, with a woman openly displaying signs declaring that Japanese families were not wanted. In 1923, jockey Frank Hayes suffered a fatal heart attack while racing Sweet Kiss at Belmont Park. His body stayed in the saddle as the horse crossed first, making Hayes the only jockey known to win a race after death. 23-year-old Choi Mi-ae was shot in the head by martial law troops during the Gwangju Uprising on May 21, 1980. 8 months pregnant, she was walking to meet her teacher husband, and neither she nor her unborn child survived. On May 31, 1921, a white mob attacked Tulsa's prosperous black community, burning more than 1,000 homes and destroying 35 city blocks. The true death toll remains unknown, with estimates reaching 300 and possible victims still hidden in unmarked graves. In 1942, a British Indian Army soldier cradles a Cypriot child while the island prepares for a possible Axis invasion. These battle-hardened troops reportedly formed a close bond with local families and often helped them with everyday work. A Lakota man paints his horse for a ceremony in Alberta, Canada in 1930. Such markings could honor the horse, show spiritual protection, or record achievements, but their exact meaning depended on the rider and tradition. At dawn on June 30, 1943, American troops landed on Rendova Island under heavy rain and Japanese gunfire. With little protection on the exposed beach, they pressed behind palm trees and captured the island, securing a base for the assault on New Georgia. American and South Vietnamese forces guard Saigon's Cholon district on May 9, 1968, during the brutal May Offensive. Armored vehicles packed the streets as Communist troops fought for control of the capital's Chinese Quarter. In 1997, IBM's Deep Blue defeated world champion Garry Kasparov in a 6-game match by 3.5 points to 2.5. The machine could examine up to 200 million chess positions every second. On July 12, 1979, thousands of rock fans burned disco records at Chicago's Comiskey Park during the infamous Disco Demolition Night. The explosion tore up the field, fans stormed the stadium, and the Chicago White Sox were forced to forfeit the second game. In the 1970s, the Bronx faced widespread poverty, abandoned buildings, and thousands of fires. This photo captures that crisis at street level, where burning trash and ruined homes became part of daily life. A Kurdish Peshmerga fighter fires a heavy machine gun in northern Iraq during the 1991 uprising against Saddam Hussein. Kurdish forces seized towns across the north, but Iraqi troops soon counterattacked and forced nearly 2 million civilians toward the borders. This photograph shows shattered Austro-Hungarian trenches on Monteferrata after the Italian Arditi attacked on August 20, 1917. It was the elite unit's first battle, and capturing this fortified hill opened the way onto the Bensiza Plateau. In Londonderry's Bogside in 1971, a young man armed with a wooden plank faced heavily shielded British soldiers during the Northern Ireland conflict. Don McCullen captured the extraordinary imbalance, improvised street resistance against helmets, rifles, and riot shields. This photo shows the first Formula One World Championship race held at Silverstone in 1950. Giuseppe Farina won in an Alfa Romeo, leading a dominant sweep of the top 3 places by the Italian team. British soldiers struggled to move a 1,320-kilogram howitzer through deep mud near Pozières in September 1916. More than 20 men were needed because shell fire had destroyed the roads, turning the battlefield into a swamp that trapped heavy guns and supply vehicles. In 1945, Allied troops crossed the Siegfried Line, where thousands of concrete dragon's teeth were built to stop tanks. The pyramids forced armored vehicles into narrow paths covered by mines, artillery, and machine guns. Soviet T-34 tanks crossed the Greater Khingan Mountains in August 1945, using routes Japan considered nearly impassable. The surprise advance helped Soviet forces smash through Manchuria and overwhelm the Japanese Kwantung Army in just weeks. Armed loyalists of Georgian President Zviad Gamsakhurdia take cover during fierce fighting in Tbilisi in 1991. The coup devastated the city center, overthrew Gamsakhurdia, and pushed newly independent Georgia into civil war. A woman smiles through barbed wire in German-occupied Kutno, Poland in 1939. Behind this brief moment, the city's Jewish population faced forced labor, confinement, and mass deportation. Che Guevara holds a Congolese baby during his secret mission to ignite a communist revolution in the Congo in 1965. The campaign collapsed after 7 months, forcing Guevara and his surviving fighters to escape across Lake Tanganyika. Armenian resistance fighters take cover near Van in 1916, 1 year after the city survived a brutal Ottoman siege. Armed civilians defended thousands of refugees until Russian forces reached Van, but the region soon fell back into chaos. United States paratroopers descend outside Panama City during Operation Just Cause in January 1990. The invasion removed Manuel Noriega after weeks of fighting and ended with his surrender at the Vatican Embassy. In 1913, prisoners in Mongolia were restrained with heavy iron chains that made every step painful. Many prisons gave inmates little food, forcing them to depend on relatives just to survive. In May 1864, Dr. Isaac Featherston met Lower Whanganui Maori, who had defeated an Upper Whanganui rebel force threatening a European town. He presented their leader with an official resolution thanking the tribe for stopping the attack. In 1987, 18-year-old Matthias Rust flew a rented Cessna from Finland through Soviet air defenses and landed beside Red Square. His shocking flight humiliated the Soviet military, and he spent 14 months in prison before being released. On February 14, 1973, Elvis Presley adjusted the jeweled robe he had given Muhammad Ali before Ali fought Joe Bugner. Ali won the 12-round fight and later joked, "I was the Elvis of boxing." These 3 men joined Ernest Shackleton's doomed Antarctic expedition in 1914, including Frank Wilde and Tom Crean, holding sled dog puppies. After their ship Endurance was crushed by ice, the crew survived months stranded in Antarctica, and Shackleton rescued every man without a single death. In 1931, 18-year-old Helen Spence shot Jack Wuerls inside an Arkansas courtroom while he stood trial for killing her father and raping and murdering her stepmother. She later killed another man who had sexually harassed and threatened her. Around 1910, Princess Victoria Louise of Prussia and Crown Princess Cecilia of Germany posed in full military uniforms for this glass negative. Victoria Louise wears the striking skull badge of the Death's Head Hussars, an elite cavalry regiment she was appointed to lead at just 17. Master Butcher Turek Sandor stands with two of his sons beside his prize Mangalica pig in Turek Szent Miklos, Hungary, in 1922. The enormous animal weighed 420 kilograms, showing why this curly-haired Hungarian breed was prized for its rich fat and meat. These workers at the Sloss Sheffield Steel and Iron Company in Alabama were photographed in 1910, including boys who looked barely old enough for school. Their oil lamps reveal the brutal reality of mining before modern safety rules, when darkness, explosions, and deadly dust were part of every shift. A Chinese worker carries heavy tin ingots at a British smelting plant in Malaya in 1941. Within months, Japan invaded the colony and seized its vast tin industry, a vital source of metal for weapons, machines, and food cans. A Russian soldier walks through the ruins of Grozny during the First Chechen War, fought from 1994 to 1996. Russian forces captured the city after weeks of brutal street fighting, but thousands of soldiers and civilians were killed. On April 23, 1971, a Vietnam veteran threw his war medal toward the United States Capitol during Operation Dewey Canyon 3. Hundreds of veterans returned their medals that day, rejecting the war they had been ordered to fight. These British infantrymen were not crossing no man's land, but charging through barbed wire during a training exercise behind the lines. Real attacks were rarely photographed this clearly because a cameraman standing in the open would have been an easy target. Oil from the grounded New Carissa washes onto the southern Oregon coast on February 12, 1999. The freighter had run aground 8 days earlier, turning a shipping accident into a major environmental disaster. Tin miners worked by candlelight deep underground in 1893 using hand tools beside crude wooden supports. Falling rock, toxic dust, flooding, and sudden explosions made every shift a deadly gamble. Civil rights demonstrators confront police officers in Nashville, Tennessee, as one young protester refuses to back down from a raised baton. Nashville's sit-ins and boycotts forced downtown lunch counters to begin desegregating in 1960. In 1964, Bob Uecker and Bob Gibson secretly held hands during the official St. Louis Cardinals team photo. When the prank was discovered, the club fined both players $25. A young New York shoe shiner smiles for the camera in 1924 after carrying his heavy wooden kit through the streets. Many working children endured shifts of up to 12 hours, earning pennies instead of attending school. In 1962, workers at Wittenum shoveled deadly blue asbestos waste into drums during a public competition, breathing clouds of toxic dust without protection. The town was later abandoned after widespread asbestos disease, and authorities eventually removed it from official maps. Workers carved through solid rock to build the Snowy Mountain scheme between 1949 and 1968. The vast project created 145 kilometers of tunnels, often using dangerous drilling and blasting deep underground. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the bankruptcy barrel became a comic symbol of a man who had lost everything, with a top hat marking former wealth. During the American Civil War, Union soldiers reportedly forced captured Confederates to wear barrels as public humiliation. On the set of Splash in 1984, Daryl Hannah poses in her mermaid tail with Tom Hanks, John Candy, and Eugene Levy. The custom tail was so convincing that Hannah secretly kept it for decades. American troops found this wrecked Japanese mini-submarine on Kiska Island after Japan secretly withdrew in 1943. By 2021, the same rusting hull was still there, slowly disappearing into the Aleutian landscape. German soldiers practiced with a flamethrower on April 4, 1917. The weapon could flood an enemy trench with burning fuel, but its heavy tank made the operator slow and dangerously easy to target. During World War II, Hattie McDaniel organized a troupe to entertain black servicemen who were often ignored by white Hollywood. Bette Davis was reportedly the only white performer who agreed to join her. Eartha Kitt leans in to speak with Marilyn Monroe at a charity event in Manhattan's Waldorf Astoria on June 13, 1957. Marilyn attended with her husband, playwright Arthur Miller, seated between the two stars. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most?